Have you ever noticed that there are people who walk into a room and without saying a word, everyone seems to trust them? It's not luck. It's not gratuitous charisma. It's strategy. Trust, contrary to what many believe, isn't born of kindness. It's born of the perception of power, control, and above all, how you manage other people's emotions. Machiavelli would call this a politics guided by reality, not ideals, because the world doesn't bow to pure intentions, but to concrete results. The truth is uncomfortable. No one trusts someone who shows desperation for acceptance. The more you ask for trust, the less trustworthy you seem. The end justifies the means when you understand that trust needs to be inspired, not begged. It's like a rare currency, and only those who exhibit control, firmness, and mystery can make it circulate in their favor. Those who master this art discover that it is better to be feared than loved, because fear builds respect, and respect paves the way for trust. Think about the leaders who have made history. They didn't earn trust by handing out hugs or sweet words. They earned it because they demonstrated consistency, because they were able to withstand pressure without wavering, because they knew when to remain silent and when to act. The calculated use of force, applied subtly, generates a magnetic aura that requires no explanation. Those who observe feel, "I can trust this person because they don't get lost in their own emotions." The intriguing detail is that this trust isn't born solely from what's visible, but from what remains hidden. The appearance of virtue is necessary, appearing fair, appearing upright. But what truly sustains this perception is the ability to never be fully deciphered. Constant adaptability, the subtle shift in posture depending on the situation, creates an enigma that captivates attention. Those who can't predict you begin to believe in you more, as if they were faced with something greater than mere human intentions. This mystery is what transforms a simple gesture into an indelible mark. A pause at the right moment, a silence that forces the other to reflect, a firm decision made without asking for validation. Every detail operates like its own loyal armies, invisible yet devastating, and little by little, this discipline shapes a solid reputation, the irresistible trust that depends not on words, but on signals that speak directly to the unconscious. This is where the paradox lies. The less you seek to be trustworthy, the more trustworthy you become. Not because you deceive, but because you understand that trust is a consequence, not an objective. When virtue is combined with fortune, your mere presence inspires security, and those who cross your path realize, almost without knowing why, that they can place something precious in your hands. And it is at this mysterious point, in this territory where reason blends with instinct, that the secret begins that few dare reveal. When we talk about obscure psychological frameworks, we're not talking about magic formulas, but principles that have spanned centuries and remain alive because they explore something inescapable, real human nature. Machiavelli, writing about politics guided by reality, not ideals, made it clear that understanding man as he is, not as we would like him to be, is the key to power. And it is precisely at this point that techniques of emotional influence emerge. The calculated use of force is not only military, but also symbolic, emotional, capable of bending perceptions and shaping behavior. Imagine someone who doesn't care about being loved, but about avoiding being hated, who builds their image with the appearance of virtue and behind the scenes operates with virtue and fortune. This person not only survives, but dominates. These psychological hacks work because they play with what's already inside us: repressed desires, ancestral fears, contradictory impulses. They're like little levers that, when pulled, provoke predictable reactions. This is where the Machiavellian maxim comes in: the end justifies the means. By manipulating emotions, the illusion of choice is created, when in fact the path has already been paved. Consider simple situations: a leader who alternates praise with criticism, or a partner who offers silence after a moment of intense affection. The other person's brain goes on alert, seeks coherence, and ends up trapped in the game. This isn't witchcraft, it's simply politics guided by reality applied to human relationships. If someone wants to apply these techniques, they don't need to start in a Florentine palace, but in everyday life. At work, for example, learning to manage strategic pauses during a meeting can change the perception of authority. In a romantic relationship, controlling predictability generates almost automatic magnetism. The logic is always the same. Decisions based on real human nature, never on idealistic expectations. Constant adaptability ensures that the person is never immediately deciphered, keeping the interest alive. It is in this realm that loyal armies cease to be soldiers and become behaviors, habits, small, subtle weapons that, when well positioned, build lasting influence. And it is precisely in this realm that obsession arises, a topic that carries even more mystery. The awakening of obsession is not born of excess, but of scarcity. Machiavelli already knew that the human mind clings more strongly to what it cannot fully possess. This is why, instead of giving his all in a relationship or interaction, the wise strategist offers only fragments, calculated doses. This is the essence of the calculated use of force. Never reveal all your cards at once. What keeps someone awake at night is not what they have received, but what they imagine they can still receive. The end justifies the means when the goal is to generate fascination, and this fascination grows precisely in the space of what has not been given. See how this appears in practice. A message replied to late, an intense presence one day and distant the next. A look that suggests more than it explains. All of this activates psychological triggers of attachment because human emotions move between expectation and uncertainty. Better to be feared than loved doesn't mean spreading terror, but cultivating the feeling that losing your attention is painful. When someone realizes that their presence is valuable and that it could disappear at any moment, a silent obsession arises. Politics, guided by reality, not ideals, shows us that it's not being good that wins, but knowing how to manipulate perceptions. A practical example: think of TV series that end each episode on a cliffhanger, forcing you to come back. People become obsessed, not with what they've already seen, but with what might happen. Similarly, when this strategy is cultivated in human relationships, every gesture becomes an emotional hook. This dynamic, when used with virtù and fortuna, draws even the most resistant in. Obsession arises when the other feels the need to decipher the enigma you've become. And it is precisely in this enigma that the perfect terrain emerges to work with even more intense forces: fear and desire, the two poles that drive every human being. Few weapons are as effective as the combination of fear and desire. Machiavelli already emphasized that the balance of power is not born of kindness, but of the ability to stir the extremes of the soul. Better to be feared than loved is not a sentence of coldness, but an invitation to strategy. Those who arouse fear maintain attention. Those who arouse desire create attraction. And when these two poles meet, a magnetic tension is born that traps someone in an almost inescapable cycle. It is politics guided by reality, not ideals, because deep down, all human beings oscillate between what they desire to achieve and what they fear to lose. In practice, this technique manifests itself in small movements. For example, showing vulnerability for a moment, an intimate detail, a gesture of affection, and then immediately pulling back, creating distance. This back and forth awakens in the other both the warmth of closeness and the chill of absence. It's like opening and closing a window in a dark room. The light that enters is welcome, but the emptiness that returns is frightening. The end justifies the means when it's understood that emotional tension is more powerful than any explicit declaration. This applies to a romantic encounter, a work negotiation, or even team leadership, where the alternation between acknowledgement and demand keeps everyone on alert. A good modern example is digital marketing. Big brands know how to balance fear and desire in their campaigns. They present the product as irresistible, but also warn of the risk of missing out. Last units available, offer expires today. The consumer becomes trapped in this game of tension, convinced they must act. It's the calculated use of force at its most elegant, playing on basic emotions to provoke action. Those who understand this logic learn to conduct relationships like those playing a violin, alternating high and low notes to keep the melody alive. And it is precisely at this point that an essential detail emerges: the power of what is unsaid, of the gesture that speaks louder than any words. The most powerful influence rarely comes from words. Machiavelli understood that the appearance of virtue, more than declarations, shaped the perception of a ruler. And this applies to human relationships. The body, gestures, silences, the way someone occupies a space, all communicate more than well-rehearsed phrases. Politics, guided by reality, not ideals, shows that a steady gaze, a restrained smile, or even the choice of when to remain silent can have more impact than an entire speech. It's as if each gesture were its own loyal army, ready to attack without the need for words. Consider a simple example. In a conversation, lightly crossing your arms can indicate protection, but suddenly uncrossing them at the right moment conveys openness and confidence. Those who master these movements begin to manipulate others' unconscious readings. The end justifies the means in this sense because it doesn't matter whether the gesture was natural or calculated. The effect is what counts. Think of charismatic leaders. They rarely convince simply by what they say, but by the way they walk, look, pause, and even the rhythm of their breathing. It's the calculated use of force applied to the body. For those who want to apply this in their daily lives, just start observing. How do you enter a room? With hurried steps and lowered gaze, or with a controlled pace and erect posture? Decisions based on real human nature show that people judge in seconds before even hearing a word. Therefore, controlling your non-verbal language is like manipulating a movie's soundtrack. It dictates the emotion of the scene. And when the body becomes the message, it creates an atmosphere in which every detail speaks for itself. But true power arises when, in addition to mastering what the body expresses, one also learns to control what the heart reveals. True power lies not in controlling others first, but in mastering oneself. Machiavelli already warned that governing requires decisions based on true human nature, and this includes recognizing that mismanaged emotions destroy more kingdoms than external enemies. The end justifies the means when one understands that remaining calm, even in the face of provocation, is a calculated use of force. Better to be feared than loved takes on another meaning here. Those who control their own reactions command immediate respect because they don't succumb to impulsive outbursts or emotional blackmail. Consider a common argument. While most people raise their voices, a trained strategist chooses silence. He listens, breathes, observes. This stance disarms the other, who expected a predictable reaction. It is at this moment that politics is guided by reality, not ideals. It's not the one who shouts the loudest who wins, but the one who keeps a clear mind while everyone else drowns in chaos. Self-control becomes a tool of manipulation because by not revealing weakness, the individual projects an image of invulnerability, and the appearance of virtue, even when merely theatrical, becomes enough to gain authority. In practice, controlling emotions can begin with simple habits, daily meditation, writing down thoughts before responding, or even breathing exercises to avoid giving in to impulses. They're like loyal armies that prepare internally before the external battle. When applied to relationships, an inevitable effect emerges. The person who maintains composure in the face of the storm forces others to adjust their tone. It's constant adaptability, a virtue that transforms hostile situations into opportunities for influence. And when the other person realizes they can't predict or manipulate their reactions, the need to monitor their every move arises. Predictability is the enemy of power. Machiavelli understood that predictable rulers were quickly manipulated, while those who cultivated a certain mystery maintained an advantage. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that those who always act the same way become decipherable and therefore disposable. Those who surprise, who break patterns, force others to remain constantly alert. Better to be feared than loved resonates here. Fear arises not only from brute force, but from the inability to predict the next move. The end justifies the means because the tension created by uncertainty keeps attention riveted. A practical example is found in modern relationships. When someone always responds the same way, at the same time, the other person gets used to it and relaxes. But when the response sometimes comes immediately, sometimes late, or even doesn't come at all, the mind enters a state of vigilance. This unpredictability is the calculated use of force applied to everyday psychology. It's not a cheap game, but an understanding that decisions based on real human nature reveal an inevitable pattern. Human beings desire what they cannot control. Virtue lies in moderation. Fortune lies in choosing the right moment. In the workplace, unpredictable leaders are often the most respected. Not because they're tyrannical, but because they never deliver a fixed script. One day they recognize unexpected effort. The next, they make a rigorous demand when everyone thought everything was fine. This constant adaptability keeps the team moving, attentive, and paradoxically, more committed. It's as if the board shifts position with each move, preventing anyone from guessing the complete strategy. And it's in this environment that a new decisive factor emerges, the notion of scarcity, which transforms even the simplest gestures into priceless currencies. Human beings value what seems rare. Machiavelli already intuited this when speaking of loyal armies. It's not quantity that gives power, but exclusivity. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that the scarcer your attention, the higher the price others are willing to pay for it. It's the calculated use of force transformed into emotional economy, offering less to be seen as more. Better to be feared than loved resonates here, because the fear of losing your presence generates more attachment than simple affection. In practice, this can be applied to small situations. If someone appears constantly available, their attention loses its luster, like an excess of currency that no longer buys anything. But when availability is limited, when time is offered selectively, the other person learns to value every minute. The end justifies the means, because restricting access isn't cruelty, but strategy. Think of artists who rarely appear in public. Each appearance becomes an event. Decisions based on real human nature reveal that mystery and scarcity are universal triggers of fascination. A clear example is social media. When a content creator posts constantly, their messages lose power. But when they emerge only at strategic moments, every word becomes gold. This mechanism, which blends virtù and fortuna, is not limited to the digital world. It can be applied to meetings, friendships, and negotiations. It's constant adaptability, knowing when to appear and when to disappear. Scarcity makes your image more valuable and makes others realize that losing your presence is almost a punishment. And when presence becomes rare, even silence becomes a resource of power. Silence is often more persuasive than 1,000 words. Machiavelli understood that the appearance of virtue could be constructed not only by what was said, but also by what was left unsaid. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that opportune silence breeds discomfort, curiosity, and even submission. The end justifies the means because a strategic pause, used at the right moment, can be more destabilizing than any aggressive speech. Better to be feared than loved takes on a new form here. The fear not of shouting, but of the void that forces the other to fill with their own insecurities. Consider the scene. In a heated argument, instead of responding immediately, someone takes a deep breath and remains silent. This space makes the other person rethink, question, and often contradict themselves. It's the calculated use of force in its most elegant form, letting silence do the work. Experienced leaders apply this in negotiations, letting their counterpart reveal more than they'd like. Decisions based on real human nature show that humans fear the emptiness of a pause because the brain seeks to fill it with answers, justifications, or confessions. In everyday life, applying this strategy is simple, but it requires discipline. It could be in a meeting, where a pause after a question generates anticipation, or in a meeting where a silent glance carries more pressure than a long speech. It's virtu and fortuna in action, because the right pause seems like chance, but it's pure calculation. Constant adaptability means that silence is never interpreted the same way. Sometimes it's firmness, sometimes it's mystery, sometimes it's seduction. And when the other person realizes they can't predict whether the silence is approval or disapproval, an emotional dependence on constantly seeking signals arises. But there's something even deeper, the process of gradually engaging without ever giving everything away at once. Nothing born all at once lasts. Machiavelli knew that politics guided by reality, not ideals, requires patience. Power is not built in a single gesture, but in layers. The end justifies the means because each step, when calculated, creates invisible roots in the next. Virtue lies in timing, fortune in choosing the right time. It's like conquering a territory. First a small outpost, then a fortress, until the entire kingdom is under control. In relationships, gradual involvement makes each revelation seem like a privilege, something rare, increasing perceived value. Think of a romance novel. If someone gives their entire life away on the first date, the mystery is lost and the interest evaporates. But when the surrender is made in doses, an intimate detail today, a vulnerability tomorrow, a childhood story later, it creates an irresistible narrative. Decisions based on real human nature show that people value what takes time to earn. Better to be feared than loved resonates here, not literally, but as a reminder. It's better for the other subject to lose each new layer of themselves than to simply believe they already have it all right away. In the professional world, the same principle applies. A leader who reveals the entire strategy up front loses authority, but one who shares only what's necessary at each stage keeps the team dependent on their guidance. It's the calculated use of force in its most subtle form, holding on to expectations. Constant adaptability ensures that each next step feels unique, tailor-made. It's like a series that only releases new episodes weekly. The audience returns not because they already know the ending, but because they desperately want the next part. And perhaps this is the most Machiavellian point of all, when someone realizes they're in too deep to leave. Did you realize that all this knowledge serves not only to understand others, but to transform the way you present yourself to the world? Machiavelli wasn't talking about distant kings, but about politics, guided by the reality that each of us lives every day. And the truth is simple: either you learn to control the perception you receive, or you'll live trapped by other people's expectations. The end justifies the means when the goal is to build a life where trust, respect, and even influence flow naturally from who you've become. Now tell me, how many times have you over-delivered, said things you didn't need to, been predictable, and lost the power you already had? Better to be feared than loved might sound harsh, but think about it. Isn't it worse to be ignored? If you keep seeking only acceptance, you'll always be one step behind. And if instead you started applying pauses, silences, doses of mystery, don't you think people would begin to see you differently? Irresistible confidence isn't asked for, it's inspired, and you already have the tools to get started. So what will you do now? Will you continue to be deciphered in seconds, or will you learn to become an enigma everyone wants to decipher? Will you continue to give your presence away for free, or will you transform it into something rare, almost sacred? If this content resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and continue delving into knowledge few dare reveal. Because in the end, those who awaken to these truths stop being played on the board and become the ones moving the pieces.